come. This should prove an informative session. This is sort of the, in some ways, sort of the launch of the search. This is Jan Eller-Isaacs. She's our Ministerial Search representative. She's jointly appointed by the district of the UUA and the Ministers Association. And her job is to assist us. And the search committee was just speaking with her over dinner, and she brings a lot of passion to this. She wants us to get the best match we can so that we can be a better congregation, that we can, be a better force in the world. So I guess without further ado, since she'll be speaking at length here, I'll hand it over. She'll be speaking for about 45 minutes or so, maybe an hour, and then we'll answer whatever questions you might have.
As Bernie said, I'm Jan Eller-Isaacs. I'm co-minister at Unity Church Unitarian in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm a lifer. I was raised at All Souls Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, till I was 11, so I had that experience of a life-saving faith, because as a child in the playground of Tulsa, Oklahoma, you do get asked if you are saved, and I knew enough to say that I was saved by this faith. And I've never stopped believing that. And then when I was 11, I had to leave Paradise and move to the San Francisco Bay Area, and where my parents got involved in a lay-led fellowship. And it seemed to me that middle-aged women in black leotards doing liturgical dance seemed to be what happened every Sunday. And sometimes my parents would drive up to San Francisco, and where Harry Schofield was the senior minister and was a passionate activist. And the San Francisco church was very much a public church in the sense that the congregation and Harry they were very, very involved in the city, and it was known as a place that hosted major citywide conversations. And so there were speakers in and out of that congregation. And it was a passionate commitment to be a liberal participant in the life of San Francisco. So I experienced a lay-led fellowship, and then this very minister-centered congregation. And then we moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, and where my parents were involved at St. John's Church near the university. And then we moved back to the Bay Area. And so I have kind of experienced Unitarian Universalism all over the country. My husband and I served an urban congregation in Oakland, California. When we arrived, the average attendance was 6. We served there for 18 years and then moved to Unity Church Unitarian in St. Paul. So, and for those of you who might recognize my name, yes, Jim Eller is my brother. I'm the better version. Her little sister had to say that. So some of you may have experienced Jim's ministry also. So if you're sitting there going, are they related? Yes. And I think that 2 out of the 4 children going into the ministry was not an accident, because we grew up in a congregation at All Souls that took its life really seriously, and the role it played in people's religious lives really seriously. And it imprinted many of us who grew up in that church, and a number of us pursued the ministry out of All Souls, Tulsa. So it really matters what happens in your religious education programs. And those of you who are volunteer teaching, some of you are promoting our faith in ways you will never know, and are creating the context for people to go into the ministry. So let me tell you again, as Bernie said, I'm a ministerial settlement rep. I am here duly appointed, and I'm here because this is largely a volunteer position, and I do it because I love doing this work. I love meeting congregations that I haven't met before. I love meeting congregations at a time when it's you're living through tender uncertainty, and you're living in an unsettled time, and as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, we are only saved to the extent that we can embrace being unsettled. And so I encourage you to live in this unsettled time, because when you can embrace being unsettled and uncertain, it means that you can embrace thinking outside the box and thinking creatively about who you are and who you want to be in the future, and the role that you want to have here in Shawnee Mission. I'm going to do a presentation, and then I'm going to pause for questions, and I hope that if you have burning questions and you're afraid of losing them, please write them down, because I really want to hear all of your questions. I'm an MSR because I'm really proud to be a Unitarian Universalist, and all of us benefit from good matches. When you have a positive match with a minister, that minister represents you well and happily. And when you don't have a good ministerial match, it ripples out. We all know it. And we care about your future as well as we care about the joint future of Unitarian Universalism. And I like being a helper. As I told the search committee, I think had the role of professional matchmaker still been available when I was pursuing my career, I probably would have opted for that, but alas, it was not possible as a career option, at least in my social environment. So I went into the ministry instead, and have been at MSR both when I served Oakland and now that I'm serving Unity. So, first of all, you are an autonomous congregation. You can create a search process however you want to, but we are here to advise you because the process that I'm working with your board in the future and now your search committee is a process that is constantly being honed and improved. We take the feedback of every congregation and every search committee and every minister very seriously, and every year we are changing and improving this process in response. So what I'm about to propose to you is something that is been tried and true and tested. The transitions office at the UUA does its best to assure that you are getting a minister that you think you're getting. It cannot assist you in vetting ministers that are not in Unitarian Universalist fellowship. So you can go out and put a one ad, out in the front saying, we're looking for a minister, inquire within. And you might get an exceptional minister, but you might not. And if you look at ministers within the UU fold, we have vetted them. They've gone through an arduous process to get where they are. And this outline procedure, as I said, is the product of many years' experience for many congregations and many ministers. The Bible of the search process is the settlement handbook for ministers and congregation, and it is available for anyone who'd like to look at it online. Your search committee is going to be reading it thoroughly. They are going to become very familiar with this process. But any of you can go online to find out more about it. Ministers in fellowship agree to abide by this process. We don't go outside this process. And if we do, we are breaking the rules and are accountable and responsible for that. It is a good process, and it serves both ministers and congregations by providing information, counsel, structure, and resources. Its purpose is to bring about the best possible match between minister and congregation. And one of the two major goals is to provide committees, search committees, and ministers alike with the greatest possible flexibility and range of choice, and with access to as much information as possible, while maintaining confidentiality and integrity in the process. So you could spend a lot less time and a lot less effort and a lot less money and perhaps make a big mistake. Or you could follow this and you could still make a mistake, and that's what's true. But if you follow the process that I'm about to outline with honesty, insight, and care, you will most likely find a good match for your congregation. So the first step I want you to know is kind of what's going to unfold. So one of the things that's going to be happening next, because you've already elected your search committee, is at your next congregational meeting, you will be approving the budget for the search process. And those of you, have any of you been involved in searches previously? Thank you. At this congregation or in another congregation? And in this one? Okay, great. So you have some sense of how expensive a search process is. Generally, a search is about $10,000. And this money is in postage, telephone costs, printing, and a lot of travel for your search committee and for the ministers that they are looking at for potential candidates. And the expenses of moving a new minister or ministry team here may be added to that $10,000, and that usually, the moving costs usually happen in the next fiscal year. Compensation. Your board bears the responsibility for recommending compensation for your next minister, and there is a wonderful role called the district compensation consultant, and that person will be meeting with your board of trustees to help them determine on what compensation package you want to be able to offer your next minister, because as we all know, out in the real world, it matters how much money you offer a particular position. The more you offer, the bigger your pool is going to be. And I told the search committee, and I will say right now that this year's search process was very unusual, because in most of the years I've been involved in the search process, generally the same number of ministers and the same number of congregations were looking. And one year it was about 110, another year it was 90. This year, 42 congregations were looking for ministers, and 120 ministers were looking for congregations. So it is a buyer's market. Penny is right, it's a buyer's market. So you are in a really, really good position to be searching right now because of that. And I can't imagine that it's going to change all that much between this year and next year. So the search committee is going to work hard to get to know each other. They're going on retreat at the end of this month, and they're going to take time. Even though you think you know them and they think they know you, they're going to take time to get to know you as much as they possibly can, because they are going to be representing you. They are going to be trying to articulate who you are and who you want to become and what kind of minister you are looking for. And if they're going to perform their task and the recommendation and presentation to you of the best minister for this congregation's future, they must strive to become a 7-person reproduction in miniature of this entire congregation. What I told them when I just met with them is I want them to be senators rather than representatives. And when you think about your representatives are responsible to represent a particular constituents, a particular geographical area, where a senator is responsible to represent the entire state. So your senators now are the members of your search committee. And do you all know who those 7 people are? Should we take time and just reiterate who those 7 are? Yes, will you please come up front, those of you who are in the room?
Thank you. This is one thing I don't like to do.
Okay.
Plus, I sing dance, and then I'm fine.
So you've got Spring, and you have Penny, and you have Tiffany, and Bernie, and Alex, and Dawn, and we're missing Jim.
Santa Fe.
Who's in Santa Fe
And
right now.
everyone knows Jim.
And he was at our meeting via Skype.
So thank you very much. These people are going to be serving you really, really well. Thank you so much for being They are going to do, to the best of their ability, they are going to try and represent who you are. And they're going to get to know each other really well, and they are going to talk really honestly with one another about their attitudes, their values, their biases, their blind spots, their shortcomings, and their gifts, because they want to serve you to the best of their ability, and the way they can do that is by being loyal to who you are, loyal to your vision and mission as a congregation, but also honest about who they are as individuals. And they're going to try and create a strong team to represent you. They will survey you in the fall, and they're going to find out again who you are as a congregation, because that is always evolving and unfolding. And the more of you who participate in these surveys and focus groups or cottage meetings, the better the results will be, the more they will truly reflect who you are as a congregation, the more trustworthy the results are. So I'm wondering who you are demographically. How many of you live with, and please stand as you are able or raise your hand, within 3 miles of this sanctuary? 3 to 10 miles. How about 10 to 20? That's pretty much everybody. Is there anybody here who drives more than 45 minutes to get here? Okay. All right, now I'd like to know a little bit about you theologically. How many of you identify as agnostics, as your primary? Please stand. How many of you identify as humanists? No, please, agnostics, please stand up. Keep standing proudly. Okay. How many of you identify as theists? All right. How many of you identify as atheists? How many of you identify as deists? How many of you identify as Buddhists, as your primary religious? What?
Jim.
Jim, okay, good to know. How many of you identify as Christian? Okay. How many of you identify as Jewish? My daughter identifies as a Unitarian Buddhiversalist. Those of you who are sitting, not to put you on the spot, are you comfortable saying what you identify with?
I'd say pagan.
Pagan? Excuse me, I meant to say pagan. Those of you who identify as pagan are earth-based spirituality, okay? Thank you. Great. Thank you so much. And Danny, you're just a technocrat? That's your religion? Thank you. Thank you so much. And I hope you are really appreciative of this large theological tent. Do you know how precious that religious diversity is? And there are very, very few places where an agnostic and an atheist can sit down with a committed Christian, Unitarian, and religious fellowship. So what we have is so precious, and you want a religious professional who can minister to that diversity and can minister to that openness. I love the story of Abraham and Sarah as they traveled in the desert, because they always traveled with a tent, and they had a tent with open sides. And a tent with open sides was, in their culture, an invitation. It was a symbol and a sign that you were welcome within. But Abraham knew that wasn't enough, and he would actually go out and seek out strangers. And he would go and say, come, I see you wandering in the desert. Come to my tent. Come get fed. And it was because he went out and reached out to those strangers that he actually entertained angels unaware. And there's a lot of work that we have to do as Unitarian Universalists in proselytizing, but that's a different presentation and a different sermon. But I just will put that nugget in here, because what you have here is precious, and it's something everyone should know about. So, your search committee, back to your search committee. They will survey you, as I said, and they want to know who you are as a congregation and what sort of minister or ministers will work most effectively with you. They will listen to you in cottage meetings and in focus groups, and they will do so because they want to better understand the soul and spirit of this congregation. And they want to better begin to envision with you how your potential is affected by the next minister you call. And I encourage you not to limit your thinking beforehand about this. The person ideal to work with you may be older than you anticipate, may be younger than you anticipate, may be a member of a historically marginalized group, may be disabled, may be male or female, gay, lesbian, transgendered. Like the rest of Unitarian Universalists, Unitarian Universalist ministers come in a wide array of styles and identities. As I said earlier to the search committee, our practice of affirming the dignity and worth of every human being has consequences. It plays out in our ministry and in our congregational lives. So the search committee publishes an open offer describing the congregation, and this is called a congregational record, and it creates a packet, and you all are going to help with them as they create a packet. And you have in your boardroom a beautiful packets from the last search when you called Tom. It's a beautiful packet, and I think represents you really well. And I remember when Tom first came here, talking about how much he was taken by your packet. So this is your calling card, this packet, and it's your history, and it has pictures, and it describes every working group, and it has descriptions of your RE program and your adult RE program and your small group ministry and your social outreach and justice involvement. All that, all of that will be explained in your packet. So anyone who is interested can go on and look at what I call the resume, the congregational record sheet, which your search committee will be creating and make available to any minister who is interested. So all I have to do, I go and register. If I'm searching for a church, I go and register in the transitions office at the UUA. And I say, I'm interested in looking at the open churches. I now have a password and a username in the system. I can access any congregational record sheet that I want. You can access any minister's sheet, it's called a ministerial record sheet, that clicks on interest in you. Okay? At that point, your search committee will have confidential access 2 ministerial record sheets. They will read all of these ministerial record sheets. Of those, they will probably invite every minister who expresses interest to exchange packets. So where you have a congregational packet that has all the information about your congregation's life, ministers have also created packets. These packets have pictures, biography, theological statements, sermons, rites of passage, so memorial services, weddings, baby dedications, coming of age ceremonies, prayers, things that they've been involved with in the community, so community involvement, maybe statements they've made to the press, editorials they've given to the newspaper. All those things are now in a ministerial packet. And you will be able to, your search committee will be looking at these ministerial packets. All of the ministerial packets will be confidential. You will not know as a congregation who your search committee is looking at. Does anyone wonder why? Okay, thank you for nodding yes. Their process is confidential because we've discovered when congregations know, people take sides, and it can become incredibly conflictual because we all are drawn to different kinds of ministers. And what you have to do is have complete trust that your search committee is doing their very best to represent who you want and need for your future. So I'm just catching up with myself. The transition office pledges to make available the ministerial record of every interested minister who is in good standing with the UUA. There's no editing here, and again, they too have assembled packets, and the selection process is extensive. As somebody who's read numerous ministerial packets and numerous congregational packets, it's time consuming and you learn a lot in reading these packets. It is a two-way street. So the ministers, interested ministers, are now poring over these congregational packets. They are looking at more than one congregation. In most years, there's anywhere from 50 to 70 congregations in search. And again, currently with 2 to 3 more ministers per congregation. And the people who are looking are the newest theological school graduates to ministers who've been serving for 20 or 30 years. The search committee is welcome to seek out other ministers that it feels may serve you well and to try and recruit them. So if you've gone to General Assembly or Regional Assembly or district events and you were really impressed with a particular minister or ministerial team, do not hesitate to pass along those names to your search committee. Because there's no harm is done, and it's actually really wonderful to get called by a search committee and said, would you be interested in putting your name in our search? And it's a win-win situation, even if you wind up saying no, because it's a wonderful phone call to get. So it's fine to reach out to ministers who are not currently in search. After they have processed the packets, and most search committees look between 10 and 20 ministers. Okay? So out of that number of packets that they will commit to reading and reading thoroughly, they will then process as a committee and select 3 or 4 pre-candidates. This will happen in the winter. So now I'm up to about January. Okay? So in January, they will extend invitations to people to come and be pre-candidates. Their work is completely top secret. even if you are a spouse, I beseech you, you can ask process questions, but you cannot ask content questions. So they will then have pre-candidating weekends, and the pre-candidating weekend will look like the person will fly into Kansas City. They will have an informal potluck dinner with your search committee. On Saturday morning, off-site, they will have a multi-hour, very formal interview. Sometime either on Friday afternoon or Saturday, they will manage to sneak into this facility and have a tour of your congregational site. They will make sure that no one else is in the building when they do that. They will then, the person will preach off-site. They will not preach here. They will preach at what we call a neutral pulpit. So one of the members of your search committee will be creating and coordinating these neutral pulpit situations. So when you notice that the 7 members of your search committee, the 6 that you saw, not counting Jim, when you notice that they're not here, don't try and figure out where they've gone. Just respect their process. They will be bringing ministers into neutral pulpits, and that the person or people will preach and conduct a service at another Unitarian Universalist congregation. Afterwards, they will generally have an informal interviewing process, usually about the content of the service. It'll sometimes focus on theology. And then after that, someone will take the pre-candidate to the airport and they will fly home. They will do that 3 or 4 times. It's a taxing weekend. Your search committee has been instructed, if they have any other jobs in the congregation, they need to let go of them. They only have permission to sing in the choir. Yeah, and if they aren't singing in the choir now, they will start singing in the choir. Now, they have now met with 3 or 4 pre-candidates. Now they have the arduous task of trying to figure out who is the best match for you. And they will rank order their choices. If they find that there's no one that they think is a good match, they will come back and they will let you know. 95% of the time, there is a successful match. But there is also the important possibility that they will come and say, we didn't find the right person or people to serve us. And you will trust their decision, and you will understand that the search needs to go another year or go another round. So currently, there are 5 congregations who did not have a successful first round search and have created a second round. And they are currently pre-candidating another round of people. And last year, I think all but one who did a second round had a successful conclusion to their search. So then after they make that choice, on April the 2nd, they will call the person that they are hoping will be your next minister. If everything goes well, that person will say yes, and they will set up a candidating week. So essentially, a year from now, you will have a candidating week where the candidate will be introduced to you. They will arrive. They'll be here for about 10 days. They will conduct 2 Sunday services. They will meet with every possible group in the congregation. They will meet with families. They will go to potlucks. They will go, whatever you have, your adult RE group, your committees, your buildings and grounds. I mean, they'll meet with every possible group that they possibly can. They will have informal office hours where people can drop by. They will try and make themselves as available to you as a congregation as possible. If they have family, their entire family will come and participate in this process. You are not voting on the family, you are only voting on the professional. And I just have to indulge me for just a second. When we candidated at Unity, our daughter was a very angry 13-year-old. And she purposely wore eye makeup about the color of this bright blue tape. And she had it from eyebrow all the way to the sanctuary, like she was ready to kill you. And it was not a positive way to meet Minnesotans. But she wasn't being voted on. We were, and for that I am eternally grateful. So, things to note. This process will not be fast. Please note all the work that your search committee is doing in your name. And if the person that they call is currently serving a congregation, that person will need to go back to their congregations and resign. Not necessarily a simple process. I am here as your support and consultant to this process. I will be talking to your search committee a lot. I will be meeting with your board later. The search committee isn't trying to be sly, but it is absolutely committed to this being a confidential process because it protects employed ministers. It prevents upsets within the congregation, and most importantly, it helps protect all of you. And it's a time to explore carefully who you are. This is a time of self-assessment, and this is something that hopefully your interim is helping you do already. But trying to figure out who you are, what you need, what directions you wish to go, and what are your shortcomings as a congregation, and be able to present the full picture of who you are to prospective ministers. There is no perfect minister for you out there. All of us have strengths, and all of us have glaring shortcomings. And what you need to decide is what strengths are most important and what shortcomings can you most effectively live with. The settlement handbook may be the Bible of the search process, but we are religious liberals, progressives. We are not fundamentalists. And the transitions department at the UUA are always available to the search committee to discuss special circumstances, and they are geared to be sensitive to perplexing and complicated issues. So I'm going to end my presentation now. I think I've done just about 45 minutes. And what I want to do now is open it up to questions.
Can you explain what happens after the 10 days?
Thank you. That was the most important part, and I didn't tell you. Thank you so much. The question is, what happens after candidating week? On that second Sunday, the person finishes conducting the service, and then they leave. You have a special congregational meeting, and you vote whether to have that person be your minister or not. The expectation is that it needs to be 90% or above. It's your search committee's memory that Tom came at a 95% vote or close to that. You want it as high as possible because what's true is your enemy list or your detractors generally doesn't shrink. So you want to start with as few detractors as possible in the beginning of a ministry.
Other than the new graduates who might be applying, do the settled ministers all apply because of a dissatisfaction with their current situation, or is there some sort of rule of thumb about moving at some period of time every?
You know, that's a really good question. The question is, what prompts a person to go into search? Is that a fair? There are ministers who are serving small congregations with and imagine a traditional small to mid-size to large. There are ministers who are dissatisfied with what's going on in their ministry and are looking to move. So there's a wide variety of reasons why a minister is looking to move. They want different challenges, they want different focus. So let's say a person is serving a congregation that doesn't have much social justice focus in the congregational's life, and they want to minister in a congregation that takes their public church role very seriously. So it's just wanting something different in their ministry, a different kind of match. Probably that's the most common reason why people search.
No pressure of a scheduled transfer, if you will, every so many years?
No, we're not like the Methodists. No, we're not like the Methodists, where it's the expectation that every 5 to 7 years you're moving on. And actually, the Methodists have stopped that because they've realized it's not the most effective way to go. And another question that I think is important that I hear behind your question: if you are looking at a minister who has had an unsuccessful ministry prior to looking at you, you will get that information. It will be above board, it won't be secret. Your search committee will know that the person went through what we call a negotiated resignation, and they will find out what that's about. Part of being on a search committee is actually being a detective. You're really just trying to get as much information as you possibly can on your candidates, on your pre-candidates.
The search committee will know that, or the congregation will know that? About the failed ministry?
Well, let's not call it failed ministry, because negotiated settlements happen from.
I'm sorry that was the phrase that you're using. I'm sorry.
I don't think I did. I hope I didn't.
Okay.
The search committee will definitely know it, and certainly if it's a person that you look at as your candidate, you will know it.
Okay.
Because you'll know the whole history of their ministry. And I do want to say that as somebody who has done some teaching in seminary and done some workshops with younger ministers, I am so impressed with the young ministers going into our ministry these days. They are passionate and clear and bright, and we're seeing a caliber of ministry right now that we haven't seen in a long time, and it's really exciting. So, Elaine Aaron is one of those young ministers, I will say.
Well, is this congregation considered small, medium, large?
Thank you. You are a mid-sized congregation. You are a mid-sized congregation. You are a mid-sized congregation. You are what's called a pastoral size congregation. It's called pastoral size. So you still can function as, as families within families.
Do ministers put in their packets specifically what they're looking for in a congregation?
Oh, yes.
And
Yes.
Is there any information about how long they've been looking? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, every year they're looking, or that kind of thing?
That information is not available. But usually the transitions office has that information, and it would be a question that you could ask Keith Cron as the director of transitions, and you could say, are you comfortable letting us know if this person has been in search for a long time? And I don't know that he's ever been asked that question. I can't imagine that he hasn't, but I don't know how he answers it, to tell you the truth. But that would be a really clever question to ask. Because some ministers, frankly, have been in search a long time, even though they are having, successful ministries ongoing. The average size of a Unitarian Universalist congregation is 150. And so you are on, you know, on the larger side and you're growing and you have a good reputation and you've taken risks as a congregation. Certainly your move here was a risky move, and ministers care about congregations that are willing to risk for their future. So I think you're in a really good position.
This is actually Brian Nelson's question.
Okay.
He has some laryngitis.
Okay.
But he wants to know, can you tell us what the pay range is for a congregation like this in the Midwest, its size?
I can't give you, the question is, what is the pay range in a congregation your size in the Midwest? And you know, I am so, is it Brian? Brian, I'm sorry, but I will make sure that your search committee gets that information because there's a geo index and then there's the size. And I think,
Are you thinking of a lot?
I think that, you know, I don't want to answer that, but I promise you I will get that information, and I really appreciate you asking that. And I'm sorry that I don't have that information.
On the same issue on pay, actually always adhere to whatever it's called, like the fair pay.
Right, the fair compensation guidelines. Yeah, you probably, my sense is that you do, so you're in good shape. If you abide by the fair compensation guidelines, which are based on the geo index and all that, and your size, then you should be fine.
The budget that's out of the fellowship hall, Benjamin's compensation is in line with the fair share guidelines. So if you want to see where we're at, you can just go look at that budget and you're going to see it.
David, do you want me to repeat that?
I have a question from online. They want to know, is there an awareness of what is, for the current ministers currently available, the established and transition ministers versus the fresh out of school ministers? Like, as a part of the total of the ministers available, are the majority of them fresh out of school, or is it pretty?
It's everything.
Equally distributed, like
I think
half of
generally
them?
it's pretty much equally distributed, though this year was this year was interesting in a number of levels. 60% of all the settlements went to men, 40% to women. And it had been more even up until this year, so it's just something to pay attention to. You know, I would just encourage you to, and I encourage your search committee to just think outside the box. Because if you think a better minister is a minister with experience, you may be really wrong. I just was consulting with another large congregation, and they picked the riskier choice. They picked a brilliant young woman, and it's just really, really exciting. And I think it's going to be a wonderful match, or I'm really hopeful that it's going to be a wonderful match.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, piggybacking on that, you speak about the beyond categorical thinking and how that plays into thinking outside the box.
Thank you, Bert. One of the things that your search committee is going to be sponsoring in the fall is a thing called Beyond Categorical Thinking. And some of you who are long tenured members here may remember that 10 years ago your search committee probably had this weekend where somebody comes from the UUA at minimal cost to you and does a Saturday workshop on thinking outside the categories, so that you really are open to you know, because you're, again, your best minister may ride a wheelchair, or, you know, have purple hair, or, you know, I mean, who knows what those categories are in your thinking. Maybe a minister of color, maybe transgender. I don't know what your categories are that are, you know, that you would hesitate. But beyond categorical thinking, and hopefully as many of you will get involved in beyond categorical thinking workshop while that person is here. And then the person who runs the workshop will also be conducting the service on Sunday. And so hopefully as many of you as are able to attend will attend. Okay, so that'll happen probably in September or October, because we want you to go through that process before you fill out the survey.
I totally get why everything having to do with ministerial candidates has to be completely in the veil of secrecy, and as a search committee, significant other. It's a good thing, of course, to understand people. And I was at a congregation where there was a big issue with somebody who was not being confidential, who knew some information. It was a mess. I mean, it was just, so I totally get that. But on the flip side, congregations that are in search, if they're actively in search, then they probably, like us, have an interim minister, and that's not, I mean, that's not confidential. I mean, that's a known thing. How many congregations are in search? I mean, they're sort of, I've heard them referred to as our competition out there in the field. Can we know who that?
Oh, absolutely.
How does that, I'm just I'm sort of just curious about.
It's all available. It's all available through the transitions office. It's something that your search committee could find out what congregations are in search right now. Currently, there aren't that many in Prairie Star. But there are a lot, not that we're still a district, I know we're a region. There are a lot of churches in play in what used to be the Central Midwest District, in the Chicago area. But, you know, what matters, frankly, is if you have a good reputation as a healthy congregation, which you do. And that goes a long way to helping secure your future. Penny?
How do we know that we have this healthy reputation? I mean, you're telling us that.
Because I'm telling you.
I understand that. How do you know? How do you? I know all the listeners get together, they gossip about each other.
We gossip about each other.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. We bet.
So that's how they know we're healthy, okay.
Again, I think when congregations are willing to risk, are willing to say, just as can I quote you, Penny?
Sure.
Penny said, there's a part of her that really wished you were back at your old site and there were 50 people at worship. But she knew in the best interest of for this congregation that you needed to move and do something different. And so she put her own individual preferences aside and really tried to lift up and move with what was in the best interest of you as a congregation. And it seems to me that your history exemplifies those kind of decisions.
You know, can you say like, okay, what's healthy about us? I think this is what I'm going to say, right?
Welcome to the rumor mill. I don't know. I think it was your choice to move here. You're risking moving into this big plan that has all kinds of, right, and how you've dealt with it fiscally and, the risk taking, the vision that you want to be larger. Frankly, some of our congregations are very self-satisfied and complacent. And that's a sad truth. So, I think you're known as a, strong family, that it's a good place for children, and that goes a long way. Because right now, 3 or 4 years ago, the primary growth bubble at Unitarian Universalism was 60-somethings, new retirees. And our demographics, who we've drawn from, historically have been come-outers, people coming from other religions that felt like Christianity was too confining, or their religious upbringing was too confining, and they wanted that kind of religious diversity that we saw earlier. Who we're getting now are 20 and 30-somethings who are nuns. They're non-affiliated. They've never been to church. They don't know about church. They don't know about pledging. They don't know about church leadership. So it's a completely different shift that we're seeing in our congregations. So it's we're creating a different picture now than we used to have. And as this presentation that I was just at a conference last week, he said, we don't even know how to deal with the nuns. And we need to figure it out quickly or we're going to lose them. Because they want a spiritual home. And some of our congregations are refusing to be spiritual homes to these spiritual seekers because they're so invested in being a land of the free and a place of free thought. and where the word spirit can't be mentioned. I don't have a sense that that's true of this congregation. Mhm.
I think perhaps I can help to answer that question a little bit, because I'm a recent transplant from another congregation. One of the things that several of us who transplanted at the same time really appreciated and noted about this congregation is that it can make tough and difficult and potentially contentious decisions and respect the process. You did that when you considered a name change, and you did that when you considered moving here. And your annual meetings are full of respect and regard, and that's a very huge thing.
Thank you.
Huge thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Do you want to move to St. Paul, Minnesota? Thank you. No, that's a huge, because a lot of our, not a lot, some of our congregations are conflict avoidant or conflict entrenched. And for a congregation to be able to hold conflict and to be able to have a dialogue of disagreement, but have it be respectful, is a huge sign of health.
Is it going to be a disadvantage that we are in Kansas? It's a great challenge.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
I was curious also, are the ministers given any instruction in thinking outside of the box, beyond categorical thinking in terms of using Kansas?
Yes, absolutely, they are. And I'll just speak from personal experience. The question, thank you, Spring. The question is, are ministers coached around them thinking outside the box, that they might actually be happy in the Midwest? And
That's so funny.
might actually possibly find happiness in the Midwest. Yes, they are. And I'll speak from personal experience. To be really honest with you, my husband and I were searching from Oakland, California. We were only looking at congregations on the coasts. We were bi-coastal, thank you. And our colleagues were like, "Are you nuts? What does it matter where it is? Look for a healthy church." And it totally broke us out of our box and saved us. We probably would have made a terrible, tragic, painful choice had our colleagues and the people at the UUA not talked sense into our heads. And what also people know is that often it's our congregations in the Midwest that are healthier. Unitarian Universalism in the New England area is struggling. Where we're seeing the most growth is in the Midwest. You can't escape that fact. If you look, if you dig. If you want to know the information, it's there.
Are there any major differences between graduates of the UUA theological schools as far as what their backgrounds are or what they're learning, or is it pretty much the same?
It can be quite different. The question is, does it matter which seminary you've gone to? It does, and yet what's important is how you pursue your education. So I knew that there were certain limitations in the school that I attended, the seminary that I attended. And I know that some of my colleagues who've attended non-UU seminaries have known that they needed to pursue more intentionally being exposed to Unitarian Universalist theology and have sought out those opportunities. So the question that your search committee will be asking is, how did this person compensate for some of the shortcomings of their seminary education? And if they're intentional about it, then that tells you a lot about that person. Like, let's just take Union. Union Seminary is not a UU seminary, but it's very popular currently with UUs. It has a very strong focus in that intersection between spirituality and social justice. And if that's something you're passionate about, Union is probably the best seminary for you. And so, Other questions? Uh-huh.
Is it a concern that we haven't been fair share contributors to the UUA in the recent past?
It's a concern for every congregation that isn't a fair share. And you were at one time, and so many congregations like you have had to cut back, and so it's dramatically impacted the UUA. And so you won't get punished, absolutely, but I'm supposed to remind you that the UUA is possible because of fair share giving congregations. So yes and no. No, you are absolutely not punished in any way because you are not a fair share congregation, but I'm supposed to encourage you to become one again.
I think this right now wants to remind us all that that's what we're working towards right now in our stewardship campaign.
We stopped being fair share when we moved into this building because of financial challenges of being in this building. This is what happened. And we need to go back up where we can do that again, but that's the challenge we faced. We were fair share until we moved.
And so that's going to be important. It's in your congregational statistics, and you know your pre-candidates are going to be.
Yeah, this is a challenge our next minister needs to help us address.
Right, and help you proselytize and tell your friends about church. Okay. Other questions? Okay. Pending conversation or questions, I think we are adjourned. But thank you very much for coming out on a Sunday night